Silence has a sound. Usually, it's peaceful. But in courtroom 4B that Tuesday morning, silence sounded like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Grant Reynolds thought the sound he heard was victory. He laughed, a cold, sharp bark of amusement, as the gavel came down, sealing a divorce settlement that left his wife, Natalie, with nothing but the clothes on her back. He turned to his mistress, grinning, thinking he had pulled off the perfect heist of a marriage. He didn't see the grey-haired man in the back row stand up. He didn't know that his victory was actually his execution warrant, and he definitely didn't know who Natalie's father really was. Grant Reynolds adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, catching his reflection in the pristine glass of his corner office. 34 years old, Senior Vice President of Sales at Vanguard Logistics, and, as of today, a free man. Or he would be by noon. He picked up his phone, dialing the number he had memorized better than his own Social Security number. "Is it done?" Jessica's voice purred on the other end. She was younger, sharper, and far more demanding than Natalie ever was. Jessica was a shark in Louboutins, the kind of woman who matched Grant's ambition. Natalie? Natalie was a golden retriever, loyal, soft, and ultimately boring. "Heading to court now," Grant said, watching the Chicago skyline. "My lawyer says it's a lock. We have the prenup, we have the evidence of her financial incompetence, and we have the judge. Judge Caldwell hates alimony cases. I'm going to walk away with the house, the portfolio, and the cars. Natalie gets the debt from that failed bakery she tried to start." Jessica laughed. "God, you're cruel. I love it. Dinner at Le Monde tonight to celebrate? I want the table by the window." "Book it," Grant said, ending the call. He grabbed his briefcase. He felt invincible. For 5 years he had tolerated Natalie. She was sweet, sure. She made excellent pot roast and kept their penthouse immaculate. But she lacked vision. When Grant talked about aggressive market expansion or shorting stocks, Natalie would ask about his day or talk about the community garden she volunteered at. She was simple, and Grant had outgrown simple. He had carefully orchestrated this divorce for 6 months. He had moved assets into offshore shell companies under the guise of business expansion. He had manipulated their joint accounts to make it look like Natalie was recklessly spending money, when in reality he was funneling it into an account for Jessica. He had painted a picture of a leeching, incompetent wife and a hard-working, suffering husband. And today, the legal system was going to frame that picture in gold. When he arrived at the courthouse, his lawyer, a shark named Baxter Thorne, was waiting. Baxter wasn't cheap. He cost more per hour than Natalie's bakery made in a month, but he was worth it. "Ready to cut the cord, Grant?" Baxter asked, smoothing his tie. "More than ready. Is she here?" "Inside, sitting with some public defender-looking guy. It's pathetic, really. She didn't even hire a specialist." Grant sneered. "She probably couldn't afford one. I cut her credit cards last week." They pushed open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B. The air was stale, smelling of floor wax and misery. On the left side of the aisle sat Natalie. She wore a simple grey dress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, smaller than he remembered. Next to her sat her lawyer, a young man who looked like he was barely out of law school, fumbling with a stack of papers that looked ready to spill over. "Look at them," Grant whispered to Baxter as they took their seats at the mahogany table. "Lambs to the slaughter." But Grant missed one detail. In the very back row of the public gallery, sitting in the shadows away from the few bored clerks and law students, sat an older man. He wore a tweed jacket that looked 3 decades old, patched at the elbows. He held a flat cap in his hands, his knuckles gnarled with age. He looked like a retired janitor, or perhaps a farmer who had wandered into the wrong building. Grant glanced at him once, dismissed him as a nobody, and turned his attention back to the judge's bench. He had no idea that the nobody in the back row was the only person in the room who actually mattered. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Caldwell swept in, his black robes billowing. He was a man known for his impatience. He wanted cases cleared, dockets emptied, and lunch on time. "Case number 490, Reynolds vs. Reynolds," the clerk announced. "Proceed," Caldwell grunted, not even looking up from his file. Baxter Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that the respondent, Mrs. Natalie Reynolds, has engaged in financial infidelity, gross negligence of marital assets, and that under the stipulations of the prenuptial agreement signed 5 years ago, she is entitled to 0 spousal support." Natalie flinched. Grant saw it, a small tremor in her shoulders. He smirked. The young lawyer beside Natalie stood up. His voice was shaky. "Your Honor, my client contends that the prenuptial agreement was signed under duress, and that the financial records Mr. Reynolds is presenting are, well, they're fabricated." Judge Caldwell peered over his glasses. "Fabricated? That is a serious accusation, Counselor. Do you have proof?" The young lawyer shuffled his papers, dropping a page. We have statements from Mrs. Reynolds regarding her spending habits." "Statements are not bank records," Caldwell snapped. Grant leaned back in his chair. This was too easy. For the next hour, Baxter Thorne systematically dismantled Natalie's life. He projected spreadsheets onto the courtroom screens, showing massive withdrawals from their joint accounts. Withdrawals Grant had made, but labeled as Natalie personal. He showed credit card bills for luxury items that Grant had bought for Jessica, claiming Natalie had hoarded them. "Mrs. Reynolds," Baxter boomed, pacing in front of the witness stand where Natalie now sat, trembling. "Did you or did you not sign for a delivery of a diamond bracelet worth $12,000 on the 14th of February? "I signed for it," Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it wasn't for me. Grant said it was for his mother." "Objection!" Baxter shouted. "Hearsay. The receipt is in your name. The item was delivered to your home. And yet, you claim poverty?" "I never saw it again," Natalie cried out, tears welling in her eyes. "He took it." "Likely story," Baxter scoffed, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, she is a spendthrift who is now trying to slander a successful businessman to secure a payday she didn't earn." Grant watched Natalie cry. He didn't feel pity. He felt annoyance. "Stop crying and just sign the papers," he thought. "You're embarrassing yourself." Through it all, the old man in the back row didn't move. He sat statue still, his eyes fixed on Grant's neck. If Grant had turned around, he might have noticed that the old man's eyes weren't the watery eyes of a retiree. They were cold, hard flint. The eyes of a man who had stared down wolves. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge addressed Grant, "you are requesting full ownership of the marital home?" Grant stood up, projecting his best, honest executive voice. "Yes, Your Honor. I purchased it. I paid the mortgage. Natalie. She dabbled in hobbies. She never contributed to the household finances in a meaningful way." "I took care of your mother when she was sick," Natalie blurted out from the defense table. "I renovated that house with my own hands." "Order!" Judge Caldwell slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Reynolds, control yourself or I will have you removed." Natalie slumped back, defeated. Her young lawyer patted her arm helplessly. "I've heard enough," Judge Caldwell said, checking his watch. It was 11:45 a.m. "The evidence is overwhelming. The petitioner, Mr. Reynolds, has provided concrete documentation. The respondent has provided tears." Grant felt a bubble of laughter rising in his chest. It was happening. "I am ruling in favor of the petitioner," Caldwell announced. "The prenuptial agreement is upheld. The marital assets, including the property at 450 Highland Avenue, are awarded to Mr. Reynolds. No alimony is awarded. Each party will bear their own legal costs." It was a total wipeout. Natalie was leaving the marriage with nothing but debt. Grant turned to Baxter and shook his hand vigorously. Then he looked at Natalie. She was weeping silently, her head in her hands, and that was when Grant made his mistake. He let out a laugh. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a loud, victorious guffaw that echoed off the high ceilings. "Better luck next time, Nat," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "Maybe find a husband who likes stale cupcakes." He turned to grab his briefcase, ready to walk out into his new life. "Excuse me." The voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't loud, but it had a timbre that stopped everyone in their tracks. It sounded like gravel crunching under a heavy boot. Grant turned around. The judge looked up, annoyed. The old man in the tweed jacket was standing up. He held his flat cap in one hand. He walked slowly toward the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. "Who are you?" Judge Caldwell demanded. "This is a closed session. Spectators are to remain silent." "I'm not a spectator," the old man said. He opened the little wooden gate and stepped onto the court floor. The bailiff reached for his belt, stepping forward to intercept. "Sir, you need to step back," the bailiff warned. The old man ignored the bailiff. He walked straight past Grant, ignoring him entirely, and stopped in front of Natalie. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on her shaking shoulder. "You done crying, little bird?" the old man asked gently. Natalie looked up, her eyes wide. "Daddy? What are you doing here? I told you not to come. I didn't want you to see this." Grant blinked. "Daddy?" He looked at the old man again. He knew Natalie's father was named Arthur. Natalie had mentioned him a few times, said he lived on a farm in Wyoming, kept to himself. Grant had assumed he was some broke ranch hand or a failed farmer. He had never bothered to meet him. Why would he? Grant Reynolds didn't waste time on flyover state nobodies. "I asked who you are," Judge Caldwell boomed, his face turning red. "Bailiff, remove this man." The old man turned to face the judge. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. "My name," the old man said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "is Arthur Sterling. And I believe, Judge Caldwell, that you're sitting in a chair that my foundation paid for." The room went dead silent. Grant frowned. "Sterling?" It was a common name. Judge Caldwell froze. He squinted at the man. "Arthur? Sterling? And?" Arthur continued, reaching into his tattered jacket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I am also the man who holds the primary lien on the property you just awarded to this gentleman." He gestured lazily at Grant. "What is he talking about?" Grant hissed at Baxter. Baxter was staring at the old man, his face draining of color. "Grant, shut up." "Why?" "Because," Baxter whispered, his voice trembling, "if that is the Arthur Sterling, we are in very deep trouble." "Mr. Sterling," Judge Caldwell's voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cautious, almost fearful tone. I wasn't aware you were in Chicago, or that you had any relation to this case." "I try to keep a low profile," Arthur said, walking toward the bench. He tossed the folded paper onto the judge's desk. "I prefer my ranch. Cows don't lie, unlike lawyers." He cast a glance at Baxter Thorne, who suddenly looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "What is the meaning of this?" Grant demanded, his temper flaring. He wasn't going to let some geriatric farmer ruin his moment. "The case is closed. The judge already ruled." Arthur turned to Grant. For the first time, Grant saw the full force of the man. Arthur wasn't tall, but he had a presence that sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was the kind of power that didn't need to shout. The case, Arthur said calmly, was decided based on the information provided. Fraudulent information. Fraud, Grant scoffed. Everything I submitted is legitimate. Is it? Arthur asked. You submitted a deed for the house at 450 Highland Avenue. You claimed you bought it. I did. I paid the down payment. You paid the down payment on a loan, Arthur corrected. A loan backed by a guarantor. Did you ever read the fine print of that mortgage, son? Grant faltered. He hadn't read it. He just signed where the broker told him to. The guarantor, Arthur said, was Sterling Land and Trust. Grant rolled his eyes. So, that's a bank? No. Arthur smiled, a dry, humorless twisting of lips. That's me. A collective gasp went through the few people in the room. Arthur turned back to the judge. Your Honor, 5 years ago, I gave my daughter a wedding gift. I quietly backed the loan on their home through my private trust. However, there was a clause in the guarantee agreement. Clause 14A. In the event of marital dissolution initiated by the co-borrower due to infidelity or bad faith, the entire principal balance becomes immediately due, and ownership reverts to the guarantor until the debt is satisfied. Arthur looked at Grant. You don't own that house, boy. You owe me $1.2 million. Immediately. Grant felt the blood drain from his face. That's not possible. The bank never said. I own the bank, you moron, Arthur said casually. Grant looked at Baxter. Is this true? Baxter was frantically scrolling through a document on his tablet. I missed it. It was buried in the underwriter disclosures. It looks binding, Grant. But that's not all, Arthur continued, enjoying the moment. He walked over to the defense table and stood next to Natalie, putting a protective arm around her. You see, Natalie is a modest girl. She wanted to marry for love. She didn't want a man who wanted her money. So when she met you, she asked me to keep her trust fund a secret. Trust fund? Grant choked out. She worked at a library. She tried to start a bakery and failed. She didn't fail, Arthur corrected. I shut it down because I wanted her to come home to Wyoming. But that's family business. As for the money, Natalie is the sole beneficiary of the Sterling copper estate. Grant's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the table. Sterling Copper. It was one of the largest mining conglomerates in North America. If Natalie was the heir, she wasn't just rich, she was wealthy. We're talking private jet wealthy. And he had just divorced her over a few $100,000 and a mistress who worked at a makeup counter. Now, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. You tried to leave my daughter destitute. You mocked her. You laughed at her. You cheated on her. Arthur pulled another document from his jacket. My investigators have been following you for 3 months, Grant. We have the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. We have the receipts for the apartment you rented for Miss Jessica Vane. And we have proof that you have been embezzling from your own company, Vanguard Logistics, to fund your lifestyle. Grant's heart stopped. That's a lie. Is it? Arthur looked at the back of the courtroom. Officers? The doors opened again. 2 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit walked in, followed by a man Grant recognized instantly, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson looked furious. Grant Reynolds, Henderson spat. You're fired, and I'm pressing charges. Grant looked around wildly. 5 minutes ago, he was a free man, a wealthy divorcee, a winner. Now the walls were closing in. "Wait," Grant stammered, looking at Natalie. "Nat, baby, please. This is a misunderstanding. I was confused. I still love you. We can work this out." Natalie slowly stood up. She wiped her tears. She looked at the man she had loved for 5 years, the man who had just laughed at her pain. She looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "Grant," Natalie said, her voice steady for the first time that day. "You didn't want me. You wanted a trophy. And you didn't want a partner. You wanted a victim." She picked up the divorce decree the judge had signed. "You wanted the divorce," she said. "You won. Congratulations." Arthur Sterling stepped forward, blocking Grant's view of Natalie. He looked at the police officers. "He's all yours, gentlemen." The click of the handcuffs was not the metallic clink Grant had seen in movies. It was a ratcheting, mechanical grinding sound that vibrated up his forearms. It was tight, uncomfortably tight, pinching the delicate skin of his wrists and pressing against the expensive fabric of his bespoke dress shirt. "Grant Reynolds," the officer droned, his voice bored, as if he did this 10 times before breakfast. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Grant couldn't hear the rest. His ears were ringing. A high-pitched whine, like a dog whistle, drowned out the reading of his rights. He looked around the courtroom, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for an exit, a loophole, a reset button. "Baxter!" Grant screamed, twisting his body, causing the officer to yank his arm up painfully. "Baxter, do something! This is insanity! Tell them!" Baxter Thorne, the lawyer who had been smirking just 20 minutes ago, was busy shoving papers into his briefcase. He wouldn't even look Grant in the eye. "I can't represent you in a criminal case, Grant," Baxter muttered, clicking his briefcase shut. "I'm a family law attorney, and frankly, considering you lied to me about your assets and used my firm to facilitate fraud, you'll be hearing from my malpractice insurance provider. Don't call me." Baxter walked out. He didn't look back. The rat was the first to flee the sinking ship. Grant was shoved forward. He stumbled, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping on the linoleum floor. He looked up and saw Mr. Henderson, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics. Henderson was a man Grant had idolized, a man Grant had mimicked. "Henderson," Grant pleaded, "Arthur Sterling is lying. He's crazy. You know me. I'm your top earner. I brought in the chaotic accounts. I'm the reason our Q3 numbers were up." Henderson's face was a mask of purple rage. He stepped into Grant's personal space, close enough that Grant could smell the coffee on his breath. "You're the reason," Henderson hissed, "that the SEC is currently raiding my office. You're the reason I have auditors tearing apart 5 years of books. You didn't just bring in numbers, Grant. You were cooking the books. Arthur Sterling didn't just call the police. He sent a forensic accounting team to my board of directors this morning." Henderson poked a finger into Grant's chest. "You skimmed $3 million off the top of the logistics contracts. You thought we wouldn't notice because you hid it in the miscellaneous shipping overages fund. But you got greedy." Grant's mouth opened and closed. "I was going to pay it back. It was a loan, an investment." "It was theft," Henderson spat. "I hope you rot." The officers hauled Grant toward the exit. As they passed the plaintiff's table, Grant saw Arthur Sterling helping Natalie into her coat. Natalie looked different. For years, Grant had seen her as a burden, a plain, simple woman who didn't understand his brilliance. But now, seeing her standing next to a billionaire titan of industry, wrapped in the protective aura of her father, she looked regal. She looked untouchable. She didn't look at him with hate. She didn't look at him with anger. She looked at him with pity. and that hurt worse than the handcuffs. "Nat," Grant whimpered. Arthur Sterling stepped in front of her again, a human shield of tweed and iron will. "Get him out of my sight," Arthur commanded the officers. The walk from the courtroom to the police cruiser was the longest mile of Grant's life. He expected a private exit. He expected discretion. After all, this was a civil court. But Arthur Sterling didn't do things by halves. When the double doors of the courthouse swung open, the flashbulbs blinded him. There were cameras everywhere. Local news, business journals, even a few paparazzi. The word Sterling drew press like blood drew sharks. The headline wasn't just local salesman arrested. The headline was son-in-law of mining magnate Arthur Sterling arrested for multi-million-dollar fraud. "Mr. Reynolds, is it true you embezzled money to fund a mistress? Grant, look here. Did you know your wife was an heiress? Mr. Reynolds, are you going to plead guilty?" Grant ducked his head, trying to hide his face with his shoulder. But it was useless. The images were being captured at 10 frames per second. The image of the arrogant, laughing man from the courtroom was gone, replaced by a sweaty, terrified criminal being shoved into the back of a squad car. The door slammed shut. The interior of the car smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. The cage wire separated him from the officers in the front. As the car pulled away, Grant looked out the window. He saw Natalie and her father walking down the courthouse steps. They weren't surrounded by the press. The reporters gave Arthur a wide berth, respectful and fearful. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. A driver opened the door. Natalie got in. She didn't look back at the police car. She disappeared behind the tinted glass, vanishing from Grant's life as completely as a ghost. Grant leaned his head against the cold window of the police car. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "This is a mistake," he told himself. "I can fix this. I'm Grant Reynolds. I always win. I just need to make a few calls. I just need to get to a phone." He didn't realize yet that his winning streak was over. The dice had been loaded against him the moment he laughed in Arthur Sterling's face. The holding cell at the 19th Precinct was a stark contrast to the corner office at Vanguard Logistics. The walls were painted a depressing shade of institutional beige, peeling in the corners. The toilet was a stainless steel mockery of privacy in the corner. The bench was hard, cold concrete. Grant had been processed, fingerprinted, mugshot taken. His tie, belt, and shoelaces had been removed, leaving him looking disheveled and frantic, his expensive trousers sagging around his waist. He had been sitting there for 3 hours. Every time the heavy metal door opened, he jumped, hoping it was a lawyer. But it was just officers bringing in more drunks or petty thieves. Finally, an officer banged on the bars. "Reynolds, you get your phone call. Make it count." Grant scrambled up. He was led to a phone on the wall. He had one number in his head. Not his mother. She would just cry. Not Baxter. He had made his position clear. Jessica Vane, the love of his life. Or at least the love of his current lifestyle. Jessica was smart. Jessica was resourceful. Jessica had connections in the city. She would know what to do. She had access to the secret account in the Caymans, the one he had given her the password to, just in case. There was nearly $400,000 in there, enough for bail, enough to run. His fingers trembled as he punched in her number. Ring. 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 "Hello?" Her voice was breathless, hurried. There was background noise, the sound of zippers, the clatter of hard objects. "Jess." "Thank God," Grant exhaled, leaning his forehead against the cold wall. "Baby, listen to me. It's a nightmare. A total nightmare. I've been arrested." "I know," Jessica said. Her voice wasn't warm. It was clipped. I saw it on the news. TMZ has the video of you being shoved into the car. You look terrible, Grant." "It doesn't matter how I look," Grant hissed. "Listen, you need to get the money. Access the account, the Cayman account. Wire the bail money to the station. I need to get out of here so I can fix this. I need to talk to Henderson." There was a pause on the line. Then, the sound of a suitcase being zipped shut. "Grant," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a tone he had never heard before. It was the tone of a stranger. "I can't access the Cayman account." "What? Why? Did you forget the password?" "No, Grant. I didn't forget the password. The account is frozen." Grant felt the blood leave his head. "Frozen? That's impossible. It's offshore. It's untraceable." "Nothing is untraceable when Arthur Sterling is involved," Jessica said. "I got a call an hour ago from the FBI. They have the account flagged as proceeds of criminal activity. If I try to touch a cent of it, I'm an accessory to embezzlement. They froze everything, Grant. The joint account, the cards, even the lease on this apartment is being contested." "Baby, calm down," Grant pleaded, panic rising in his throat like bile. "We can fight it. I have other assets. I have the portfolio." "You have nothing," Jessica snapped. "I just got off the phone with my lawyer. Do you know who Arthur Sterling is? He's not just rich, Grant. He's have people disappear rich. He's buy the bank that holds your mortgage rich. You went to war with a nuclear power with a water pistol. Jess, please, I need you. I'm in a cell." "And I'm at the airport," Jessica said flatly. The world stopped spinning. "Airport? Where are you going?" "Tulum," she said. "My sister is there. I bought a one-way ticket on my own card before they could freeze that too. I'm leaving, Grant." "Leaving? But we're supposed to be together. I did this for us. I got the divorce for us." Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound that reminded him, painfully, of his own laugh in the courtroom. "You did this for you, Grant. Because you're a narcissist. I liked the trips. I liked the jewelry. I liked the penthouse. But I'm not going to visit you in federal prison. I'm 26 years old. I have a life to live. And I'm not going to live it as the girlfriend of a broke, convicted felon." "Jessica, don't you dare!" "Goodbye, Grant. Don't call me again. If you do, I'll tell the feds about the safety deposit box you have in Jersey." Click. The line went dead. Grant stood there, holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a hornet. He stared at the graffiti scratched into the metal casing of the phone. Jessica. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The woman he had embezzled millions for. The woman he had thought was his soulmate. She hadn't just left him. She had fled the country within hours of his arrest. "Time's up," the officer said, grabbing Grant's arm. Grant let the phone dangle by its cord. He walked back to his cell like a zombie. He sat on the concrete bench and put his head in his hands. For the first time, the reality of the situation truly hit him. It wasn't just a legal setback. It was a total annihilation. He thought about Natalie. He remembered coming home late from work. Dinner with Jessica. Finding Natalie asleep on the couch with a plate of cold food wrapped in foil waiting for him. He remembered how she used to rub his shoulders when he was stressed about quotas. He remembered how she never asked for anything expensive, only for his time. He had thrown that away. For what? For a woman who abandoned him the second the credit card declined. For a career that was now over. For a reputation that was in tatters. And the worst part? The absolute worst part was the realization of who Natalie really was. He had spent 5 years thinking he was the prize. He thought he was the successful executive carrying the dead weight of a simple, small-town girl. He had looked down on her. He had patronized her. All the while she was sitting on a copper empire. She could have bought Vanguard Logistics and fired him just for fun. She could have bought the penthouse building. But she hadn't. She had lived simply because she wanted a real life. She wanted him to love her, not her father's money, and he had failed that test in the most spectacular way possible. Sterling Copper, Grant whispered to the empty cell. He knew the name. Everyone in business knew the name. It was old money, the kind of money that built railroads and cities. Arthur Sterling was a legend, a recluse who famously despised the glitz of Wall Street. Grant remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. Natalie had asked him, "Grant, if I lost everything, if I couldn't work, if I was sick, would you still stay?" He remembered laughing and saying, "Don't be dramatic, Nat. Of course." But he had been checking his emails while he said it. She must have known then. She must have been testing him. The cell door clanged shut down the hall. Someone was screaming about their rights. Grant lay down on the hard bench, curling into a ball. He had no lawyer. He had no job. He had no mistress. He had no home. He had $1.2 million in debt to his ex-father-in-law, and he was facing 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. He closed his eyes, and the image of Arthur Sterling standing in the courtroom played over and over in his mind. "I'm the man who holds the primary lien." Grant Reynolds realized then that he hadn't just lost a divorce case. He had walked into a trap that had been set years ago, a trap designed for a man exactly like him, a trap for a man who valued gold over loyalty, and the trap had snapped shut. 3 months had passed since the flashbulbs blinded Grant Reynolds on the courthouse steps. 3 months of federal detention at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The MCC was a fortress of concrete and misery in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was a triangular skyscraper designed to prevent escape, but for Grant, it was a tomb. The high-rise views he used to covet from his corner office were now just slivers of sky seen through 5-inch slits in the frosted glass of his cell. He had been denied bail. The judge cited significant flight risk and attempts to access offshore accounts associated with criminal enterprise. Jessica's attempt to run to Tulum had backfired spectacularly on him. It painted him as a man with an escape plan, even though he had been abandoned. Grant had lost 20 pounds. His hair, once styled with expensive pomade, was grown out and greasy. The bespoke suits were replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. But the physical degradation was nothing compared to the psychological torture. He had plenty of time to think, time to replay every moment of the last 5 years, time to realize that every move he made, which he thought was brilliant strategy, was actually a step toward a cliff. It was a Tuesday afternoon, rainy, judging by the grey light filtering into the cell block, when the guard banged on his door. "Reynolds, legal visit." Grant perked up. He had been assigned a public defender, a harried woman named Mrs. Higgins, who smelled of cigarettes and despair. She was trying to get him a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't budging. They wanted his head on a pike to satisfy the shareholders of Vanguard Logistics. He shuffled down the hallway, his shackles clinking. He was led into a small, sterile room, divided by a thick pane of bulletproof glass. He sat down, expecting to see Mrs. Higgins with her overflowing folders. He didn't see Mrs. Higgins. Sitting on the other side of the glass, posture impeccable, hands folded on the metal ledge, was Arthur Sterling. Grant froze. His breath caught in his throat. Arthur looked exactly the same as he did in the courtroom. Tweed jacket, flat cap on the table, eyes like polished flint. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man inspecting a fence post that had rotted. "Sit down, Grant," Arthur said. His voice was muffled slightly by the glass, but still carried that undeniable authority. Grant sat. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to weep, to beg, to scream, but he held it together. He still had a shred of pride left, though it was tattered. "What are you doing here?" Grant asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Did you come to gloat? To see the animal in the zoo?" Arthur shook his head slowly. "I don't derive pleasure from this, son. Wastefulness always bothers me. And you are a profound waste of potential." "You ruined me," Grant spat, leaning toward the glass. "You set me up. That trap with the house lien, you knew. You planned it." "I planned for contingencies," Arthur corrected. "There is a difference. When I signed that guarantee for the house, I hoped I would never have to use it. I hoped you would be the man Natalie thought you were. I hoped you would be a partner to her. A protector." Arthur leaned in. "Do you know why I never told you about the money? About the sterling copper fortune?" "Because you're a paranoid old miser," Grant sneered. "No, because money acts like a magnifying glass," Arthur said softly. "If a man is kind, money allows him to be a philanthropist. If a man is greedy, money turns him into a monster. I wanted to see who you were without the lens of my wealth distorting the view." Grant looked away. "Well, you saw." "I did," Arthur agreed. "But here is the part you don't know. The part that might keep you awake at night in here." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket. For a second, Grant flinched, remembering the documents Arthur had pulled out in court. But this time, Arthur simply pulled out a photo. He held it up to the glass. It was a picture of Grant, 3 years ago, shaking hands with a man in a grey suit. It was the day Grant had secured his first massive investor for a side project, a logistics consulting firm he was trying to launch. That investor had given him $50,000 in seed money. Money Grant had eventually funneled into his affair with Jessica. "Do you remember Mr. Silas?" Arthur asked. "Yeah," Grant said, confused. "He was an angel investor. He liked my pitch." "Mr. Silas works for me," Arthur revealed. "He manages my charitable giving." Grant's jaw dropped. "I gave you that money, Grant," Arthur said. "I saw you were restless. I saw you wanted to build something of your own. Natalie told me you felt stifled at Vanguard. So, through an intermediary, I gave you $50,000. No strings attached. I wanted to see what you would do with a leg up." Grant felt the room spinning. That was your money?" "It was a test," Arthur said. "If you had used it to build the business, to work hard, to create something real, I would have revealed everything. I would have welcomed you into the Sterling Empire. I would have handed you the keys to the kingdom, Grant. You have the charisma. You have the drive. You could have run Sterling Copper one day." Arthur lowered the photo. "But you didn't build the business. You used the money to lease a Porsche. You used it to buy dinners for women who weren't your wife. You took a gift meant to build a future, and you used it to destroy your present." Grant stared at the table. The weight of the revelation was crushing. He hadn't just lost the marriage. He hadn't just lost the house. He had lost a destiny. He could have been a CEO, a billionaire, a titan. It was all laid out for him, waiting for him to show just 1 ounce of integrity, and he had traded it all for a lease on a car and a fling with a girl who left him at the first sign of trouble. "Why are you telling me this now?" Grant whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Why torture me?" "Because Natalie wanted you to know," Arthur said, standing up. He put his cap back on. "She wanted you to know that you weren't defeated by a prenup. You weren't defeated by a lawyer. You were defeated by your own character. You had the winning lottery ticket in your pocket for 5 years, Grant, and you threw it away because you were too busy looking for loose change on the sidewalk." Arthur turned to leave. "Wait!" Grant cried out, slamming his hand against the glass. How is she? Please. Just tell me. Does she hate me? Arthur paused at the door. He looked back, his expression unreadable. She doesn't hate you, Grant. Hate requires energy. She's indifferent. She's moving on. She's found her light again, now that she's not standing in your shadow. The heavy steel door clanged shut, leaving Grant alone in the silence. The echo of the door sounded exactly like the gavel that had ended his life. The seasons had changed in Chicago. The biting wind of winter had melted into the grey slush of early spring, but inside the Federal District Court, the air remained frozen. Grant Reynolds sat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles had turned the color of old bone. He looked nothing like the man who had laughed in divorce court 6 months ago. The arrogant tilt of his chin was gone, replaced by a permanent stoop. His hair, once his pride and joy, was thinning and dull, grown out awkwardly over the collar of the cheap, ill-fitting suit his public defender had scrounged up for him. He was 35 years old, but he looked 50. The courtroom was packed. This wasn't the quiet family court affair where he had tried to crush Natalie. This was a federal sentencing hearing. The gallery was filled with grim-faced shareholders from Vanguard Logistics, employees who had lost their bonuses because of his embezzlement, and journalists hungry for the final chapter of the sterling son-in-law scandal. Grant scanned the back rows again, his eyes darting frantically. He was looking for a flash of blonde hair. He was looking for Natalie. He told himself he wanted to apologize. But deep down, in the dark, honest corners of his mind, he knew the truth. He wanted her to save him. He wanted the woman he had called boring and simple to use her billions to make this nightmare stop. But the back row was a sea of strangers. Natalie wasn't there. She hadn't sent a letter. She hadn't sent a lawyer. She hadn't even sent a curse. She had simply erased him. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Judge Holloway entered. She was a formidable woman with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human greed. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at Grant like he was a smudge on a pristine countertop. "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Holloway began, her voice calm and terrifying. "We have heard the statements from the prosecution. We have seen the forensic accounting. You have pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of embezzlement, and 1 count of money laundering." She paused, letting the charges hang in the air. "In my 20 years on the bench," she continued, leaning forward, "I have seen men steal out of desperation. I have seen men steal to feed their families. But you, Mr. Reynolds, you stole out of hubris. You stole because you believed you were smarter than everyone in the room. You looked at a wife who offered you loyalty, and you saw a stepping stone. You looked at a company that gave you a career, and you saw a piggy bank." Grant flinched. Every word felt like a physical blow. "Your lawyer has asked for leniency," Judge Holloway said, glancing at the exhausted public defender beside Grant. "He argues that this is your first offense, that you have lost your reputation. But I see no remorse in you, Mr. Reynolds. I see only regret that you were caught." Grant tried to stand, to say something, but his legs felt like lead. "Your Honor, he croaked. "Stand up," she commanded. Grant scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. "Grant Reynolds, for the crimes committed against Vanguard Logistics and the fraudulent financial manipulation of marital assets, I sentence you to 12 years in a federal correctional institution." A gasp went through the gallery. 12 years. It was heavy. It was a lifetime. "You will not be eligible for parole for at least 10 years, Holloway added, hammering the final nail into the coffin. "Furthermore, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4.2 million. Your wages will be garnished for the remainder of your working life until this debt is paid to the victims and to the Sterling Trust. Bang! The gavel came down. The sound was final. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on the world Grant Reynolds used to know. "Take him away," the judge said, already opening the next file. As the U.S. Marshals moved in, cuffing Grant's hands behind his back, he looked one last time at the doors of the courtroom. He realized then that the silence he had heard when he laughed at Natalie was not victory. It was the universe holding its breath before the strike. 3 weeks later, the transfer. The bus ride to the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute was long and smelling of diesel fumes and unwashed bodies. Grant sat chained to the seat, staring out the window at the passing cornfields. He had no one to call. Jessica Vane had vanished into the wind, reportedly living off the last of her jewelry in a coastal town in Mexico, likely hunting for her next target. His friends from the country club had blocked his number the day the news broke. Baxter Thorne, his shark of a lawyer, was facing his own disbarment hearings and had threatened to sue Grant for unpaid legal fees. Grant looked at his reflection in the bus window. The man staring back was a stranger. He closed his eyes, and the memory played on a loop. The moment in the divorce court, the feeling of invincibility, the laugh. Ha, ha, ha. It was the most expensive laugh in history. He realized now that Arthur Sterling hadn't just beaten him. Arthur had taught him a lesson that would take 12 years to learn. Grant had spent his life chasing gold, never realizing he was already holding a diamond. The bus turned through the heavy iron gates of the prison. The razor wire glinted in the sun. Grant Reynolds, inmate number 89402, stepped off the bus and walked into the shadows. Wyoming. The Copper Creek Ranch, 1,000 miles away, the world was wide open. The sun was just cresting over the jagged peaks of the Grand Teton Mountains, casting a golden glow across the valley. The air here was thin and crisp, smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and sagebrush. Natalie Sterling stood on the wraparound porch of the main ranch house. She held a ceramic mug of steaming coffee, watching the steam curl up into the morning light. She looked different. The woman who had huddled in court, wearing grey, shapeless dresses to hide herself, was gone. In her place stood a woman who occupied space. She wore fitted dark denim, leather riding boots that were scuffed from actual work, and a thick wool coat. Her hair, which she used to keep in a tight, severe bun because Grant said loose hair was messy, fell in soft golden waves down her back. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean mountain air. For 5 years, she had felt like she was holding her breath, walking on eggshells, trying to be smaller so Grant could feel big. Now she could breathe. The screen door creaked open behind her. Arthur Sterling stepped out, wearing his usual tweed jacket, looking more like a ranch hand than a billionaire mining magnate. "News came in," Arthur said softly, leaning against the railing beside her. Natalie didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the horizon, where a herd of elk was moving slowly across the lower pasture. "Is it done?" "It's done," Arthur confirmed. Judge Holloway gave him 12 years, and full restitution. Natalie took a sip of her coffee. She waited for the wave of emotion, sadness, pity, maybe a lingering spark of love. But there was nothing, just a quiet, settled peace. It was like finishing a book that had been dragging on for too long. You don't mourn the end. You just close the cover and put it back on the shelf. "It's a long time," she said simply. "It's the time he earned," Arthur replied. He watched his daughter carefully. "How do you feel?" Natalie turned to her father. Her eyes were clear and bright. "I feel Light. I feel like I woke up from a long, feverish dream. Arthur smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. Good, because you have work to do. The board approved the final papers this morning. Natalie's face lit up, a genuine smile that transformed her face. The bakery initiative? The Sterling Culinary Institute for Women, Arthur corrected with a grin. Fully funded. You're the executive director. We're going to open the first 3 locations in Chicago, Denver, and Seattle. You're going to help a lot of women get back on their feet, Nat. It was the dream she had buried. Grant had called her baking a waste of time. He had shut down her little shop. Now she was going to use the empire he coveted to build a legacy that would outlast them all. She would take women who had been discarded, underestimated, and broken, and she would give them a way to build their own lives. I'm ready, Natalie said. I want to start Monday. Monday? Arthur laughed. Take the weekend, sweetheart. Go for a ride. Natalie set her mug down on the railing. Down in the paddock, a black stallion, a magnificent beast named Obsidian, whinnied, sensing her presence. You're right, she said. She vaulted over the porch railing, landing softly in the tall grass, just like she used to do when she was a teenager, before the city and the suits and the lies. Where are you going? Arthur called out, though he already knew. To the ridgeline, she shouted back, breaking into a run. I want to see the view from the top. She ran toward the horses, her laughter carrying on the wind. It wasn't a polite, stifled chuckle. It was a loud, joyous, uninhibited sound that echoed off the mountains. Grant Reynolds was sitting in a 6x8 concrete box, staring at a grey wall. But Natalie Sterling was flying. She kicked the stallion into a gallop, tearing across the open plains of Wyoming, riding toward a future that was finally, completely her own. And that is the story of how Grant Reynolds learned the hardest lesson of all. You never know who is truly sitting in the back of the courtroom. Grant thought he had won the game, but he didn't realize he was playing against a man who owned the board. He chased fool's gold and lost a diamond, proving that arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world. Natalie didn't just get her revenge, she got her life back, reminding us that sometimes the best revenge isn't hatred. It's thriving without the people who held you back. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a story. We have a crazy revenge story coming up next week involving a lottery ticket and a runaway groom that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.